Colorado Territory, autumn, 1884. She lowered her eyes because she couldn't bear to watch him leave. "Take care of yourself, Wyatt," she whispered. He nodded once. Then he reached into his pocket. Emma's heart broke. She thought he was handing her one last letter, something to remember him by once he rode out of Cedar Ridge and never came back. Instead, he dropped to one knee. Before she could understand what was happening, the story pulls back 3 weeks, to the first quiet morning this all began. Cedar Ridge sat against the foothills west of the Front Range, a small ranching town built by families who trusted hard work more than luck. The Mercer Ranch stood on the northern edge of the valley, and every sunrise found Wyatt Mercer already outside, mending fence rails or breaking a young horse in the corral. He was 29 years old, tall, steady, and known through the whole valley as a man who kept his word and paid his debts on time. What people didn't know, because he never told them, was how lonely his house had become since his mother passed. He worked from dawn until his hands ached, and some nights that was the only way he could fall asleep without thinking about how empty the rooms were. The Whitfield ranch bordered his land to the east. Samuel Whitfield ran cattle there with the same quiet steadiness Wyatt admired, and his wife Margaret kept a home so warm that neighbors found reasons to stop by even when they didn't need anything. Their daughter, Emma, was 24, with blonde hair she wore pinned into a simple bun and a smile that put people at ease before she even said a word. She rose before the sun most mornings, tended the garden, helped with the wash, and still found time to carry soup down the road to old Walter Boone whenever his back gave him trouble. Wyatt had known Emma his whole adult life. He'd eaten at her family's table more times than he could count. He'd watched her grow from a girl following her father around the barn into a woman the whole valley respected. And somewhere in the last 3 years, without ever admitting it out loud, he had fallen in love with her. He never said anything. Grief had taught him that loving people meant risking losing them, and he had already lost enough. So he buried the feeling under work, the way he buried most things, and told himself that Emma deserved someone who wasn't afraid of his own heart. Emma waited. She never chased him, never dropped hints at church socials the way some of the other young women in town did with eligible bachelors. She simply believed that a person's heart couldn't be forced, and that if Wyatt's ever healed enough to open, he would find her standing right where he'd always known her to be. That patience was tested on a Tuesday morning in late September, when a letter arrived at the Mercer Ranch carrying an official seal from a land office back east. Wyatt read it twice at his kitchen table before he understood what it meant. His late father had left behind an unresolved claim on a parcel of land near the Kansas border, tied up in paperwork for years, and now a cousin Wyatt barely remembered was trying to file for it first. If Wyatt didn't travel there himself and settle the matter, he stood to lose land that rightfully belonged to his family. He told Samuel Whitfield first, leaning against the corral fence the way he always did when he had something serious on his mind. "I have to go settle it myself," Wyatt said. "Could take 3 weeks, maybe a little more." Samuel studied him for a long moment. "You planning on telling Emma yourself, or letting this town do it for you?" Wyatt didn't answer right away, and that silence would cost him more than he expected. By Thursday, half of Cedar Ridge had a version of the story, and none of them matched what Wyatt had actually said. At the general store, a traveling salesman named Otis Farrow had overheard part of Wyatt's conversation with the land office clerk and decided the truth wasn't nearly as interesting as what he could invent. He told anyone who would listen that Wyatt Mercer was leaving for good, that he intended to sell the ranch once the land dispute settled, and that there was already a woman waiting for him back east. None of it was true. But gossip doesn't need truth to travel fast, and by Saturday the story had grown legs of its own. By the time the tale reached the church social that weekend, Otis had added new details he hadn't even bothered to invent the first time. He claimed the woman in Denver was the daughter of a banker, that Wyatt had been writing her letters for over a year, and that the sale of the ranch was already arranged with a buyer from Cheyenne. None of it held together under any real questioning, but nobody in the crowd stopped to question it. A good story spreads faster than a careful one, and by Sunday morning half of Cedar Ridge was treating rumor as settled fact. Emma heard the worst version from a well-meaning neighbor at church, delivered in the gentle, pitying tone people use when they think they're being kind. She sat through the entire service with her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring straight ahead, refusing to let anyone see her cry in front of the whole congregation. It was the longest hour of her life, and she counted every minute until she could walk home and be alone with it. Henry Collins, Wyatt's oldest friend, heard it first at the livery and rode straight to the Mercer ranch to ask if it was true. Henry had a grin most people trusted and a way of cutting through nonsense that Wyatt had always appreciated. "Folks in town are saying you're selling out and there's a girl waiting on you in Denver," Henry said, not bothering to dismount. "There's no girl," Wyatt said. "There's a land claim my father left unfinished. I have to go settle it before my cousin files first." "Does Emma know that?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "I'll tell her before I leave." "You'd better tell her today," Henry said. "Because Evelyn Harper already told half the church quilting circle, and you know how fast that travels." Henry rode into town that same afternoon to find out where the story had actually started, and it didn't take him long. He found Otis Farrow at the general store, holding court in front of a small crowd, embellishing details with every telling. Henry stood at the back of the group and listened until he couldn't stand it any longer. "You ever actually spoken to Wyatt Mercer?" Henry asked, loud enough for the whole store to hear. Otis hesitated. "I heard it from a reliable source." "Funny," Henry said, "because I've known Wyatt my whole life, and there's no woman in Denver, no buyer from Cheyenne, and no ranch for sale. Might want to check your reliable source before you keep telling stories that could hurt real people." The crowd went quiet, and a few of them had the decency to look embarrassed. But rumor moves faster than correction ever does, and by the time Henry's version reached everyone who'd heard the first one, plenty of people had already made up their minds. He was right to worry. By the time Wyatt made his way to the Whitfield ranch that evening, Emma had already heard 3 different versions of the story, each one worse than the last. She met him on the porch, arms crossed against the evening chill, her eyes red enough that he knew she'd been crying before he arrived. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are you selling the ranch?" "No," Wyatt said. "Emma, none of that is true. I have land business east of here, that's all it is." "And the woman in Denver?" "There is no woman in Denver." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her the real reason his chest felt tight every time he thought about the weeks ahead, but the words caught somewhere behind his teeth the way they always did. Instead he said, "I'll be back before the first snow." "You have my word." Emma studied his face for a long moment, searching for whatever wasn't being said. "Then why does it feel like you're saying goodbye?" He didn't have an answer for that. He rode home that night wondering the same thing himself. The days that followed were harder than either of them expected. Wyatt spent his mornings preparing the ranch to run without him, and his evenings sitting on his porch, working up the courage to tell Emma the truth he'd been avoiding for 3 years. Walter Boone, the old widower who lived down the road and had buried a wife of his own decades earlier, found Wyatt there one evening and settled onto the porch step beside him without being invited. "You're about to leave this valley for a month," Walter said, "and you still haven't told that girl how you feel about her." "It's not the right time, Walter. There's no such thing as the right time. There's only the time you have, and the time you waste." Walter tapped his cane against the porch boards. "I spent 30 years married to a woman I almost let walk away because I was too proud to say what I felt. Don't make my mistake, son. Silence doesn't protect anybody. It just leaves the people you love guessing, and guessing is where all this gossip nonsense grows from." Wyatt sat with that a long while after Walter left. Meanwhile, Emma had a decision of her own weighing on her. A letter arrived from a schoolhouse 2 counties over, offering her a teaching position starting that winter. It was a good opportunity, steady wages, a respected occupation, and for the first time in years, a reason to imagine a life outside Cedar Ridge. She hadn't told anyone she was considering it, not even her mother, but she read the letter 3 times the night Wyatt left for the land office, and she began to wonder if waiting for a man who might never speak his heart was really a life worth choosing. Margaret noticed the letter on her daughter's dresser and said nothing at first, only watched Emma carry it with her for days like a question she couldn't put down. "You're allowed to build a life for yourself, Emma," Margaret finally said one evening while they shelled peas on the porch. "Wyatt Mercer is a good man, but a good man who never speaks isn't the same as a good man who chooses you." "I know," Emma said quietly. "I just always believed he would, eventually." "Belief isn't a promise, sweetheart. Sometimes it's just a habit we're afraid to let go of." Emma didn't answer that night, but the words stayed with her. She wrote back to the schoolhouse 2 days later, asking for 2 more weeks to consider the position before she gave her final answer. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't the outright no she might have written a month earlier either. Every evening after that, she found herself standing at her window, watching the road that led toward the Mercer ranch, half hoping to see Wyatt's horse coming toward her with something to say, and half preparing herself for the disappointment when he didn't come at all. Evelyn Harper stopped by one afternoon with a basket of preserves and found Emma folding linens with more focus than the task required. "You're thinking about that letter from the schoolhouse," Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what I'm thinking anymore," Emma admitted. "I've waited 3 years for a man who can't say 4 words to me. Maybe it's time I stopped waiting and started living." "There's no shame in that," Evelyn said gently. "But make sure you're choosing it because it's right for you, and not because you're angry at a man too stubborn to speak his own heart. Anger makes a poor reason to build a whole new life." Emma thought about that long after Evelyn left, turning the words over the way she'd turned over so many things that autumn. Wyatt's business east of the territory line went faster than expected. The land office clerk, once presented with Wyatt's proof of inheritance, ruled in his favor within days, and the cousin trying to claim the land withdrew his filing rather than fight a case he couldn't win. Wyatt could have stayed the full 3 weeks handling smaller matters, but something pulled at him to get home sooner, a feeling he couldn't quite name until he was already halfway back to Cedar Ridge. He arrived a full 10 days early, dust still on his coat, and rode straight past his own ranch toward the Whitfield property. He found Emma near the old cottonwood tree by the creek, the same tree where they'd become friends as children, where they'd carved their initials one careless summer and never mentioned it again. She looked up when she heard his horse, and something in her face told him she'd already made peace with a version of this moment that didn't include him staying. "You're back early," she said. "I finished faster than I thought." He dismounted and walked toward her, feeling the same tightness in his chest that Walter had warned him about. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you, and I should have said it 3 years ago." Her eyes filled before he even finished the sentence, because she'd braced herself for a different conversation entirely. She thought this was the goodbye the whole town had been predicting for weeks, the moment where Wyatt finally admitted the ranch was for sale, that he was moving on to whatever life waited for him beyond Cedar Ridge. "Take care of yourself, Wyatt," she whispered, lowering her eyes so she wouldn't have to watch him say it. He nodded once, throat tight with everything he'd been too afraid to say for 3 years. Then he reached into his pocket. Emma's heart broke. She thought he was handing her a letter, a final goodbye written out because he couldn't manage the words out loud. She braced herself to accept it gracefully, the way she'd promised herself she would if this day ever came. Instead, he dropped to one knee. In his hand was a thin silver ring that had belonged to his mother, carried in his coat pocket for nearly 6 months, through every ride into town, every conversation he'd chickened out of, every evening he told himself tomorrow would be easier. "I'm not leaving, Emma," he said. "I never wanted to leave. I've been in love with you for 3 years, and I was too scared of losing someone else to ever say it. I don't want to spend one more day pretending I feel anything less than everything for you. Marry me." For a moment Emma couldn't speak at all. The tears that had already gathered for a different reason now fell for an entirely new one. "You let this whole town believe you were leaving forever," she finally managed, half laughing, half crying, "and you're asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking because I should have asked a long time ago," Wyatt said. "I let fear keep me quiet, and it nearly cost me the only thing that ever mattered to me. I'm done being quiet, Emma. I choose you. I've always chosen you. I just didn't have the courage to say it." "Yes," Emma said, before he'd even finished rising to his feet. "Yes, Wyatt, of course, yes." Word of the engagement reached town before Wyatt and Emma even made it back from the cottonwood tree, which meant Cedar Ridge learned two truths at once, that Wyatt Mercer wasn't leaving after all, and that the rumor about a woman waiting for him in Denver had been invented from nothing by a traveling salesman looking to entertain a bored afternoon crowd at the general store. Henry Collins made sure Otis Farrow heard exactly what the town thought of him spreading stories that nearly cost two good people their happiness. Otis left Cedar Ridge on the next stage west and didn't come back. Evelyn Harper, who had unknowingly helped the gossip spread, showed up at the Whitfield porch with a pie and an apology, admitting she should have asked Wyatt directly instead of repeating what she'd heard secondhand. Samuel Whitfield, it turned out, had known about the ring for months. Wyatt had asked his blessing back in the spring, terrified and stammering through the request, and Samuel had agreed to keep the secret so that Emma's surprise would be genuine when the moment finally came. "I almost gave up on him," Emma admitted to her father that night. "I was ready to take a teaching position 2 counties over. I thought I'd waited long enough." "Sometimes the waiting is what teaches us what we're willing to fight for," Samuel said. "And sometimes it teaches the other person the same lesson, a little slower." Reverend Thomas Avery married them the following spring, once the frost had cleared and the cottonwood by the creek had begun to bud again. Half of Cedar Ridge turned out for the wedding, including Walter Boone, who sat in the front row with his granddaughter Lily beside him, and Sheriff Owen Brooks, who kept the peace at the reception mostly by making sure nobody drank Margaret's punch before the toasts were finished. Lily, 8 years old and never short on things to say, tugged on Wyatt's sleeve during the reception and asked him why he waited so long to tell Emma he loved her if he'd loved her the whole time. Wyatt knelt down to her level and thought about it honestly before answering. "Because I was scared, Lily. Grown-ups get scared too, sometimes even more than children do. I thought staying quiet would keep me safe. But it almost cost me everything I wanted." "That's silly," Lily said. "You should always just say the true thing." "You're right," Wyatt said, smiling. "It is that simple. Took me a lot longer to learn it than it took you." Wyatt and Emma built their life on the combined edge of both family ranches, and within a few years the Mercer-Whitfield spread became one of the most respected homesteads in the valley, known as much for its horses as for the couple who ran it with equal parts hard work and open honesty. They raised 3 children who grew up hearing the story of the cottonwood tree told 100 different ways, and every version ended with the same lesson their father made sure they understood before they were old enough to court anyone themselves. Never let a rumor speak louder than the people you love. And never let fear speak louder than the truth in your own heart. Cedar Ridge remembered that autumn for years afterward, not for the gossip that nearly tore 2 good families apart, but for the evening beneath the cottonwood tree when a young man finally found the courage to reach into his pocket, and gave the whole town proof that honesty, spoken even a little late, is still worth more than silence carried for a lifetime. If this story moved you, subscribe to see how more stories like this one unfold, and comment below to let me know where you're watching from. I would love to say hello and hear just how far our story has traveled together.